Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's .NET Conf Student Zone session. We're going to be talking about building with ASP.NET Minimal API and single page applications, or SPAs, and why I think these two tools together are going to make for a perfect match for the kinds of application we can build. My name is Aaron Powell. I'm a principal cloud advocate here at Microsoft in the .NET on Azure team, and I've been doing web development for many years now, and I've had a lot of experience building single-page applications in particular, because I spent a lot of time focusing on that kind of JavaScript side of it. But I think that we need to obviously make sure we're building backends, and I think that throughout this session today, we're going to see how well ASP.NET Minimal API will fit together. But like I said, I'm a bit of a front-end guy, so I want to start with that. And that's kind of where I want to contextualize the problem space. Like, you're building a front-end web application using kind of the modern JavaScript libraries to build that. So we're going to be building an application with Vite. Vite is a tool for kind of scaffolding and then building an application using kind of whatever JavaScript library you want to use for building UIs. We can be building this with React or Svelte, Vue, or a myriad of other ones that are supported with Vite. Today, we're actually going to be using React just because that's the library that I'm more familiar with and I prefer to build with when I'm building UIs. But you could easily take the patterns and the design that we're covering off in today's session and apply that with a Vue application or anything else, because we're focusing kind of on that single page application and the APIs that are going to support that. Speaking of APIs, for us to be building an application, if we're building a single page application, we're probably going to need to get data from somewhere. Otherwise, we're building just a fully statically rendered web application, and that's sort of outside of what we're covering off today. So we've got Vite that's going to be building out our HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and kind of generating those files for us. But then we want that backend service. And this is going to be a .NET application. And like I said, we're going to be using the ASP.NET Minimal API. We'll see how we can build a couple of APIs and then make those available to our client application. And we're going to be doing that over just HTTP. I'm going to just use the fetch API that's built into browsers, but you could be wrapping this with a library to improve the way that you do HTTP requests and responses, such as like Axios or things like that. But I want to keep this kind of as agnostic of the frameworks that we're using so that you can pick and choose the right tools that are going to be needed for the application that you're building. Speaking of how we're building this application, we're going to be using VS Code. Mostly because I do a bit of front end development here and there, and I find VS Code is just it's the best tooling that I've used for doing front end web development for many years. And I think that if you're coming at this problem space from that kind of web development perspective, you're more likely using VS Code than anything else. And with VS Code, we combine that with the extensibility model that it's got and bring in kind of those extensions that we want when we're building out our application. We can bring in things like Prettier and ESLint so that we have our style guides and we're applying the coding design that we want. We're making sure that we're not introducing things that are going to break the kind of coding standards that we have inside of our application. But I'm then going to combine this with the new C# extension that we've recently released for VS Code. You could also add the C# dev kit to VS Code, and I'm going to be using that inside of my demos just because I like some of the additional features that brings in, but you don't need to use all of those if you don't want to. You can just use the new free open source C# extension. Dev kit just adds a few more things over the top of it that if you're coming from like a Visual Studio experience, you might be looking for. I think, though, that's really enough slides for today because I want this to be a very hands-on activity so that you can build an application. And that's what we're going to tackle into next. If you want to follow along live, or live as the recording could be, you can jump onto the GitHub repo at aka.ms/netconf23/student repo. And then inside of that, you'll find the 2023 folder and then the folder to this particular application that we're building. You'll find there both the starter version and a finished version. So if you just want to jump to the end and see the completed application, you can do that. But obviously, I'm going to start with the starter kit, and we're going to be building from there. I said, that's enough slides. Let's jump over to VS Code. So here I am in the starter project that I've set up, and I've gone ahead and scaffolded out a few things that we're going to be needing here. mostly so that we don't have to watch like an npm install, npm create, and .NET new and a few things like that. I have a front-end folder, and this is our Vite application that's been scaffolded up for us. This is building with React, as I said before, and I'm also going to be using React with TypeScript. So I've got like a TS config. So it's going to be bring that type safety that I like as a .NET developer to the front-end application that we're building. But otherwise, it is a standard Vite scaffolded application with React, and I've added 2 additional npm packages. Fluent UI's React components. So Fluent UI is a UI framework for building applications that we use here at Microsoft, and it's open source. You can use it in your own projects. Mostly because I'm not a web designer. I can build web UIs, but I can't make them look pretty. So I wanted something that's going to give me a bit of a hand in that regards. So I brought in the Fluent UI for that one. And I've also brought in Day.js because we're going to do some date formatting in the application that we're building. The other folder of major importance here is the minimal API folder. And this is going to be our backend for our application. This is a ASP.NET minimal API application that I've just scaffolded out with .NET new from the command line. The only additional thing that I've added here is this data folder, and I've brought in a JSON file, which is going to be the data set that we're building for our application. So what I've got here is I've got the sessions export from .NET Conf that's going to be happening in a couple of days' time, because we're going to be building a web experience of over the .NET Conf agenda, allowing us to pick and choose which sessions that we want to kind of track and kind of add to a watch list, so that maybe we're not going to be able to catch them live, and we want to be able to find them later on and know which ones that we tagged as the ones that we're most interested in and come back and watch those easily. So that's what we're going to be building. And to save having to set up a database or anything like that, we've just got a JSON file that we're going to be working with here. We're going to be doing some write operations as well, and we're going to write that to a JSON file, again, just to save having to add a database. But there's no additional dependencies that we're adding to this application. So like I said, this is just a C# project that's been scaffolded up, and we're not going to bring in any new NuGet packages or things like that. Now, the other folders that I've got in here are just to make it a bit easier to work with inside of VS Code. So I've got a .vs Code folder where I've defined our debugging experience. So we can launch the front end and the back end application, or we can launch the full stack debugging experience, which is going to start both front and back end servers at the same time. And we'll connect those together, and we can do a single unified debugging experience. I've also included a dev container definition. So dev containers are a way that we can define a development environment that uses Docker or a container orchestrator as the manner for doing that. This means that if you want to open this in a GitHub code space, it's going to pre-install all the dependencies that you need, such as .NET 8, which we're going to be using for our application here. I also am installing .NET 7 just in case I have any extensions in VS Code that are going to still rely on that, because at the time of recording, .NET 8 is still in preview. So some of the extensions, such as the C# extension and C# dev kit, are not necessarily designed to work with .NET 8. They'll work together, and that'll be resolved when .NET 8 is officially released. I've also added to this that we're going to install Node, because I'm going to need Node in here to run our front-end application. And then finally, installing a couple of extensions into this. I said you can open this in a GitHub code space, and it's going to pre-install those, or you can open this using the VS Code remote extensions, and that will then pre-configure your development environment with all these dependencies. Otherwise, you just need to make sure you have those things installed, and you'll be good to go with our application. All right, so let's just have a look what happens if we start our debugger. So I'm just going to open the command palette and say debug full stack. We're going to run like the whole application. We're going to start everything up. All right, so here we go. It's going to start up the server. So we're going to end up with 2 servers running. And let's just pop this to the side. We'll put VS Code on here. So we have our backend server is running at HTTP localhost 5181. And if we have a look in the program.cs file, we'll see that we have one API at the /API route, or we have one route, which is /API. Let's just test that. We'll see, we got hello world. Let's zoom that in a little bit. There we go. So there is our backend. Like our backend's up and running. But we also have our front end running here at port 5173. We'll load that one up, just zoom that in too. And you'll see that this is just, like I said, scaffolded out React application. But we're not going to be using that. We're going to kind of start everything from scratch, or at least delete some of this boilerplate code, and we're going to build up from there. So let's just stop off our debugger experience because we're not going to need that just for the moment. And let's start with the HTTP endpoint that's going to return the sessions to our browser. So I'm going to create a string, and we'll call this the session path. That will be the path to data. Oops, got my keyboard in it is there. There we go. /data/session eyes.json. All right, so that's the location where our files are on disk. Oh, sorry, that session eyes data is on disk. And then we're going to do a HTTP map get, an app.map get. We'll see I've got GitHub Copilot running, and you'll see that, well, I reckon that code pretty much looks like what we want. If we see, let's just push this over a couple of lines. So we're using system.text.json. If I add that using statement and get rid of our red squiggly, there we go. So we're going to be deserializing the sessions into a type called session. Well, I actually don't have a type called session at the moment. I haven't written that type yet. And if we go into the sessionize JSON, let's just have a look at kind of what is the structure that we're going to need. Well, clearly this is an array because .NET Conf is over 3 days. So we've got an array of days, or array of days where our sessionize data is within. And inside of that, we've got things like group ID and group name. And then we've got the session, an array of sessions, and sessions then has a whole bunch of properties. And then one of those properties is an array of speakers. Okay, we've got a couple of different types that we're going to need to have here. I'm going to do a little trick here and make it very easy for me to scaffold out all of these types. So let's just copy and paste that. We only need one of the sessions here, so I've just deleted the others for the moment. I'm going to come into GitHub Copilot chat here, clear off this, and we're going to say generate C# types from the following JSON. We'll pop in that JSON, and let's see, will it generate me some types? Okay, here we go. Oh yeah, that's pretty much the types that I'm going to be needing. Oops. It looks like it's triggered some kind of a filter response on that. So I'm going to suggest that, to follow its suggestion, we're going to downvote that. And instead, let's ask it to generate with the properties as properties having the first character uppercase. I noticed that if we have a look at these, it's like ID with lowercase I, name with a lowercase n. That's not really C# coding standards. So I need to re-execute this prompt. And to do that, I'm just going to give it some more information, try and fix that prompt, fix the result that we're going to get out of there. So let's kick that off again and see if it's going to generate me there. Well, that's generating me some better responses here. We'll see that we get our capitalized values as expected, and excellent. We didn't trigger off the an error path or anything within GitHub Copilot, so fantastic. Let's create a new file inside of here, and we'll add we'll go models.sessionize.c# and come back to Copilot here. Let's copy all of that in. We'll just close the sidebar down, add a namespace, which will be minimal API models, and then we'll paste all of these in. Okay, so I'm going to pull these out to separate files just because I don't like having one file that contains everything. Let's just pull all of these out. Whoops. We'll just use, I'm doing Control Dot. That's what's bringing up this little menu, or you can click that light bulb that's there. Move that to a new file. Just to illustrate, so if I click that light bulb, move to a new file, and then last but not least, we'll go session, across to a new file. All right, give it a moment. There we go. We've found that we have a list of sessions. Everything's all there. Excellent. That's what we're hoping for. Now we'll come back to our program, and we're not going to return a list of sessions. We want a collection of sessionize, which is that kind of root type there. So we'll just do sessionize, and I'm just going to return that as an array. And we'll see that it's automatically brought in that using statement here. All right, so let's save that and let's just launch the debugger for the backend because we're not building our front end just yet, but we'll start with our backend and see if that's working. So that's all compiling down there. Our debugger is up and running. And let's go to /API/sessions. Whoops, looks like we've hit an error. I have probably spelt the path of that incorrectly. You can tell that this is a live coding demo because I probably spelled something incorrectly. Sessionize, is that it? No, okay, that was all correct by the looks of it. Could not find path. Okay, let me just make sure that I did spell that correctly. Oh, and while we've got this file open, let's just add all the sessions back in. We'll undo that change that we had there. And let's just paste that file name in. Okay. Oh, whoops. I don't need the forward slash on top of that. That was then telling the file system to go to like the very root of our file system, which is clearly not where that's going to be. We'll debug the backend again. And it's up and running. Reload. Ta-da! We've got, well, we're close. We've got 3 groups there that it's identified, but, well, the group IDs are all 0. We don't have group names. We don't have any sessions. So clearly we still don't have something correct. Well, what we're missing here is, well, that kind of translation from JSON to C#. We'll see that group ID is starting with a capital G, whereas if we have a look back at our sessionize JSON file, group ID is a lowercase g. So we need to tell the deserializer to handle that properly. So we'll set some JSON serialization options. We'll just call that serialization options. And then we will get it to, well, Copilot can complete some of this for me. Now, we'll see that it's added some stuff that I don't need, such as write indented, because we're not doing writes. I'm just doing reads at this point. So I'm going to get rid of write indented, and we're going to say case, we'll add the property name case insensitive thing. It's kind of mutually exclusive, I guess, saying camel case and case insensitive, but I'll just put them both in there. Debug the backend again. Oops. Just realized one other thing. I might have created serialization options, but I didn't actually tell the serializer to use them. So let's add that in, and we'll add in the serialization options. All right, now we can start our backend again. See how many tabs I can end up open as it launches each time. There we go. Ta-da! We've got our backend running, and it is returning us all of our data. Excellent. Now we can go ahead and build our UI. Well, actually, before we do that, I just want to talk about the fact that we're reading a file from disk. So this is going to be a pretty quick operation, but I could be reading this out of a database. And in that case, maybe we want to do this as an asynchronous operation rather than a synchronous operation. We don't want to block any other potential incoming requests. Obviously, for a demo application like this, we're not going to have a whole bunch of traffic load, but we can change this instead to make it an async function, async. And then from this, instead of doing read all text, I'm going to extract that out and use a file stream. And we'll call that file stream equals file stream, open the session path. And then we are going to pass in the file stream to here. But instead of deserializing synchronously, we're going to deserialize asynchronously. And then we'll say await on this. So now we've made this a asynchronous operation. Just to demo, we'll debug the backend. So it becomes a non-blocking thing. So like like I said, if we were talking to a database, maybe you want to be pulling it that way. And we'll see that everything is still working exactly as we were expecting, but it just means that we can handle more traffic for our little demo application here. All right, so we built our backend. Our backend's able to service sessions. Let's go ahead and build the UI. So I'm going to come into the app.tsx, and inside of this is, well, the scaffolded out Vite code that we had before. Let's delete this all back because we're not going to need any of that. We'll delete off the set state that we had there, but I'll be using state, so I'm gonna leave that inside of here. Now let's think about what we've got to do from the UI. The first thing we need to do is we need to go and pull the data back, right? But we're going to need to kind of indicate to the user that we're doing an operation. We're going to be fetching out some data. So for this, I want to kind of track a couple of different state transitions that our data fetching could go through. So for that, I'm going to use a TypeScript enum. So I'm going to create an enum called data load state. And inside of this, I want to have, well, I don't like them being uppercase. So I'm going to say not loaded. So initial page state is that we haven't attempted loaded data. And then we're going to have loading. We're fetching our data, loaded. And then lastly, we're going to have, and we'll put in an error state, but we probably won't implement errors. That could be an exercise for you as the viewer. So we're going to go ahead and create our data load state. And look at that. Copilot has added that in for me, and it's set the initial state as not loaded. And then we're going to create some data and set data. And we'll say use state. And that can be an array. But again, like we don't have any types here because well, we generated some C# types. But what about generating some TypeScript types? Well, again, let's come back to Copilot and say generate TypeScript types from the C# types. All right, let's see how is it going to generate. Oh, look at that. We are getting a whole bunch of types there. Let's copy this. We'll come into our application and we'll add a new file. We'll go models.session_eyes.ts. And again, I'm just going to pull these out into separate files just because I like them being in separate files. Move that to there. Move that one to a new file. And last but not least, category item. Now, admittedly, we're not actually going to use a whole bunch of these types, so I could have, kind of written that out myself. But I like having all of it in there because we could expand the application in the future. Now, something I did notice on the on the session item here is that we have an any because we actually don't know what question answer could be. I'm going to delete that because we're not going to use question answer at all. So I'm not going to try and generate a type for it. So we're just going to kind of have that one ignored. Close up my app.ts just while I was trying to close everything down, but that's not correct. I want sessionize array. So that is going to be the type of our data. Great, we're getting underway, but let's just go and start building out the UI. .NET Conf session selector, call it that. And now, because we have that data load state, we're going to say if the data load state is not loaded, let's add a spinner. And it'll bring that spinner in from Fluent UI because, well, I'm not a UI designer, but I can pull in that from a library. And we'll start up we'll start up our whole application. Let's get ready to start actually seeing these changes happen in the UI. I do have it running here, so let's just reload this one. Let's see what our UI now looks like. In a moment, or that tab might have actually timed out because it had been off, been closed. So excellent. Here we go. We have a spinner, and let's open up the dev tools here at the bottom. See just how cramped we can make the screen is on the recording. But there we go. Okay, so the spinner is there. So if it is not loaded, actually, if it's not loaded or we're loading, we're going to want to show that spinner. Or the data load state equals to data load state of loading. There we go. Okay, so if we're loading or we're not loading, then we're expecting a spinner to be there. Now it's time to get some data. And for this, I'm going to use an effect hook in React. Oops, there we go. And we will put our squiggles in. And I only want this to run on the initial component mounting. So I'm just going to pass in an empty array of dependencies. Okay, so we're going to need to go out to the API and kind of do what GitHub Copilot has just suggested, except it was suggesting for me to do something just with kind of this the inline like then approach to working with promises. but I'd prefer it to be an asynchronous function. So because an effect has to be synchronous, we'll create a inner function for that called fetch data. And let's see. Oh, look at that. Copilot, again, will just write it all for me. Kind of feels like cheating, although that's not what we want to hit. It's just some random sessionized endpoint. We're going to hit API/sessions. All right. So we are going to pull that all in. Then, yep, that looks all correct. Fetch data. Let's load that up. Okay, cool. We've attempted to get some sessions. If we have a look at the response, just like we can see that that's come in there. We'll come to the response and we'll see that that doesn't look like JSON, which is what we expected. And we're also getting two of those. Let's one problem at a time. One problem at a time. We've got JSON. We're expecting JSON, but we've got some HTML. Well, why did that happen? And I suppose this is actually where if I had been implementing an error state, we'd probably see that. Why does that happen? Well, we're hitting this endpoint of /API/sessions, but that it thinks is part of our React application here, when realistically it's part of our API application. And that's running on a different HTTP port. So what we need to do is we need to tell our Vite application where to find that. Now we could obviously pass this, set this as like HTTP : and like the path of the port. We could maybe inject that as an environment variable, but then we have two independent deployable units. In the future, if we deploy this maybe to like Azure Static Web Apps, we want to treat that as a single deployed unit. And I want to be able to go /API/ to get to my API. I don't want to have to deal with like calls or anything like that. So thankfully, I can just come into my Vite config, and I'm just going to copy a Vite config that I have pre-prepared, and then talk about what I've done. What we're doing is we are going to be using an environment variable. So we're going to be loading this environment variable here, and then we're going to look for environment.api URL. Otherwise, we're going to fall back to that. Now, I have actually set that environment variable within inside of the launch config. So when I'm loading up the front-end application, it's injecting this environment variable of API_URL, which is the endpoint of our HTTP backend. So now we can just pull that in. We can treat this as a single application. And let's see, that looks like we have got some JSON back. One step closer. The only thing we're missing is the fact that it's calling this endpoint twice. Now, the reason that it's doing that is because I'm running React in strict mode. And strict mode will mount the component and then unmount it, and then mount it again, just to simulate the possibility of state transitions really quickly and allow you to catch potential problems such as this. So what we want to do is when this component is unmounted, like if it was to drop off screen, we want to then get rid of that previous fetch request. We don't need to wait for the response because we're not going to do anything with the data. So what we want to do is we want to abort this fetch request, and we can do that with an abort controller. So let's create an abort controller, and that will be a new abort controller. We will pass the abort controller signal as the signal to our fetch request. And then finally, I'm going to return from this effect a cleanup function. So if this component is unmounted, this return value will be executed of this effect, and it will abort our abort our fetch request. So let's load that up now, and we'll see that the first one now has a red X against it because it was aborted, and we'll see that we didn't actually get any response because we canceled said request. So just a good little tip that if you are running, if you are doing kind of data loads like this, you probably want to make sure that you're not accidentally executing more requests than you need, and using something like an abort controller so that you can cancel requests is a really good idea. All right, so we've got our session data there. It's time to start displaying sessions. So let's go. If the data load, not if it's error. We're not going to worry about error states. If it is loaded, we are then going to return a new component here, and I'm going to create a new component. We'll call it session eyes list, and that is going to take the data, and we'll pass that data in there. So let's come into our tree here, and we're going to create a components /session eyes list.tsx. And let's create that component. Export const sessionize list, and then we'll return a component. Now, I can create a type for this, but we really only have one prop at the moment anyway, so let's just do data, and that will be, what was it, sessionize, and we'll make that like that, and we're going to deconstruct here, so we'll get that data back. Okay, so just, I guess, yeah, let's follow what, I was going to get Copilot to just scaffold me out a basic component just so we can see if this works. It's not going to work because that is group ID, and we'll just do, say, group name just for the moment. And then we need to import that component into here. Save that. There we go. We're getting out of the way. We're starting to build out a UI. We can do better though from a UI standpoint than just some bullet points like this. We're going to create. I kind of want like some kind of a header you can click on to navigate between the different days, and then as you navigate, we're going to change the sessions that are listed. So we'll delete off our stub code that we got from GitHub Copilot, and I'm going to add a tab list control from Fluent UI. So we'll add our tab list. And inside of this, we can have tabs. Actually, the tabs are going to be made up from mapping through our sessionized data. Now, it is called tab, not tablist.item. Again, GitHub Copilot is making, well, it's trying to make assumptions based off of what it thinks the data looks like, but that's not quite what it is going to be. So we'll just give it some help there. So we're going to give it a group ID. We're going to need to, oh, I have just done something. Let's just reset zoom, and then we'll zoom back in again because I pressed a button on my keyboard and things got a little bit freaky. Value, we need to provide a value, which is going to be, do we need a value? I don't know if we need a value yet. Tab, yep. And then we're going to say day, and actually we're going to grab I, and we'll say day, and we'll do, instead of sessionize.title, which doesn't exist, we'll do I plus 1. Okay. And okay, we're missing a value from there. So let's say the value can be the sessionize. Yeah. Let's call it that. Dot group ID. There we go. Okay, let's save that. And I have not got, I've got a closed squiggle there. Oh, I forgot to close the tab list component. There we go. That's what it's unhappy about. There we go. Nice little heading. We'll see as we hover across them. I'm getting a little underline indicating where we're at. And that's working. Cool. But we don't actually know which day we're on. The value is there, it's tracked. So what I'm going to add is a way that we can, like when we click on that, we can track the value. So we'll add some more state. We'll do the selected day. We'll call it selected day, and we'll do set selected day. And we'll just initialize that with the current group. No, not group ID. We'll just put the whole group in there. It's just passing memory references around. So that can be easy. And then the value can be that, and then we'll do selected. So it is, no, I don't, we don't need to change that. Do we? Active? No. I'm trying to remember if I needed to set something up, to indicate that this is the current selected tab, but no, that's tracked internally with inside of the tab list component. But yeah, so there we go. Reload that. Okay. Done. And I'm just going to check my notes because, yep, that looks all good. Make sure I am returning this corrected. Oh, I need to specify which is the selected value on the tab list so that we can control this initially on startup. And we're like selected, we're properly controlling this. It'll be selected. It should be selected day, not select day. Selected day. It's because that sounds more grammatically correct. There we go. Okay. Now we're not clicking around because we're not tracking which is the selected day. So what we're going to add is an on-click handler here, and we will then just say set selected day, and we'll pass in the session ID, which is the current selected day. And I accidentally closed the parentheses too soon. All right. There we go. Our tabs are working again, and we're transitioning across days. Now all we've got to do is render out our list of sessions. So for that, I'm going to create a new session list component, and we'll pass through the sessions. That seems good. We'll export const session list, which will just save that as session list.tsx. And then that can have, what do we call that? We call that sessions. And then that will be a sessions array. And from here, we will we'll return something in a moment. Let's just return an empty component while have a bit of a think about what we're going to return. Let's just get our compiler errors all fixed and all of our JavaScript runtime errors. Return. Oh, it doesn't like that empty component because it needs to have children inside of it. Okay, what we're going to do is I'm going to create an inner component with inside of this. So we can do sessions.map, and then we'll pass through the session, and we'll create a session component that will take the current session. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Now, let's create that session component. We'll create a const session, and then that is going to receive those values, and we'll return our open and close React fragment, and then we will just do a div /div, close off that. And then inside of here, we'll have not a date, but we will use a H2 instead of a H1. Okay, let's see. I've got a whole bunch of red squigglies. We've got to figure out what all of these red squigglies are representing. Okay, so we are on session. Something thinks there is something is returning a Boolean. That's interesting. Const session equals that. Return. Oh, hang on a sec. Did I rename that file badly? It thinks it's a TypeScript file, not a TypeScript React component file. So let's fix that. That's probably going to sort out. There we go. Okay, session dot title, session title, session description. Oh, look at that. Fix that up nicely. And then the last thing we're going to add is our list of speakers, which will be session.speakers.join. And then we'll do that. And squiggle. There we go. Oops. Speakers dot map. Map s and s dot name. There we go. Okay, there we go. Now that's looking better. Let's check the divider in between these just so it's clearly indicated where each session break is. There we go. Look at that. Let's click. It's working. We're navigating between tabs. We're seeing different data. It's looking pretty good. That's it's not bad for a good little scaffold up of a UI over our React application there. But we're not quite done yet. We've only done read operations so far. We still need to be able to do some write operations because there's not going to be a session selector if we've got no way to select sessions. So for this, we're going to add we're going to add a button to this page. And when you click on the button, it's going to then allow you to add the session to your watch list, or if you already added it, it will remove it from the watch list. So let's start by adding some button. Actually, I just realized there's one bit of data that's missing here. I don't know when the sessions are actually on. Let's add that one in. We'll add in a P, we'll add in a time element, and then we're going to add in, actually, I'm going to grab our some stuff that I wrote earlier for working with time zones, because that is a little bit more verbose than I feel like typing out at this minute. Not going to need that, and we're not going to need that. Okay, so what we're using is a JavaScript library called day.js, and then day.js has a bunch of plugins for working with multiple time zones and stuff like that. So I'm going to bring in localized format, because we're going to localize it to your current time zone, the time zone extension, and then UTC. Created a couple of functions such as format. So the dates that are in the data are in PST, or Pacific Standard Time, which is Redmond time. And then so we're going to format that way, and then we're going to format time, and we're going to allow you to provide in an override for the time zone you want to use. And then adding a local time zone, and we're just using date.js tz guess to try and figure out what time zone you're currently in to then display that out. Now, let's render out all that time data, which is possibly around about that information. So we're going to format date with, hang on a sec. It thinks that's a date. It's actually going to be a string, because we're not deserializing. So let's just make that a string. All right, so starts at, and then we will send that through to format. Oh, whoops. And then we will do hyphen and ends at. And then just to indicate this is PST, I'm going to put a PST line on the end. Okay. So that is that session is 14th November 2023 at 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. PST. That's correct according to the .NET Conf website. But it is, well, it's not really helpful for me. I'm in Sydney. So while I can see that it's PST, what time is that for me? Let's duplicate this chunk of code, and we'll pass in the local time zone. So we're going to pass in the local time zone, and we'll pass that across to our starts at, and then we'll pass that through to the ends at, and then we're going to render that out here, which will be local time zone. Okay, there we go. That is 3 to 4 a.m. Sydney time. Probably not going to get up for it. Now watch the recording of that one, I think. Let's get rid of the Australia prefix. So we'll do a split on slash, and we're going to just take the on the slash, and we're going to just take the second part of that. There we go. So Sydney time, that is going to be 3 to 4 a.m. Excellent. I'm liking the way this UI is working now. But it's enough UI. Let's go back to the backend, and let's build out those additional APIs that we're going to need so that we can read the sessions that you've selected and, well, write selected sessions. So we'll come back into our program.cs, and I'm going to create a new route here. So we're going to do string selections path, and that can go into data/selections. That sounds good. And then we're going to create a, that app.mapget. Again, because we want a HTTP get to get the selections. Actually, I'm going to make it /user selection, just so I know that it's kind of scoped to a user operation. We'll open the file stream for read. We'll then deserialize that. But we're just going to deserialize that as a string, because we'll just store the IDs of the sessions. We don't need to store more information than that. And we'll return the selections. Now, we might not have had any selections yet, so we probably want to check to make sure the file exists. So if the file doesn't exist, we will return, we'll just return an empty array, because that's fine. We don't actually need anything more than that. Oops. Oh, didn't. There we go. So we'll just return an empty array if there isn't one exist. I'm just using, what I'm using here is the C# collection literal syntax. And that's why I'm just doing open and close square brackets to indicate that I'm going to return an array. That's part of C# 13 that is in preview, at least at the time of recording. And then now I need to do a map post. Sure, let's see. What did Copilot generate for me this time? I feel like I'm cheating a little bit here. We will write all to text, that path of that selection file. Yep. Now, we don't need to worry about whether the file exists or not when we're doing the write, because it will generate that file if it doesn't exist already. And we're going to receive an array of strings, which is all the selections. So we're just being really simplistic here. We're just always going to overwrite the existing selection set. Done. All right. Let's restart our server again, because the backend is all completed. We can build out our new UI to work with that. Well, we can, sorry, more accurately, we'll extend our UI to work with that. So we're going to need to add a, we'll say a new hook here. We'll do const selections, and we'll do set selections, and that can be an empty string array. Done. And now we need to get those selections back when we're doing it. So I'm going to do that kind of as part of this effect here. So on the initial load. So instead of doing an await fetch, I want to do these requests at the same time. So I'm going to use promise.all, and then we're going to pass in an array of awaitable operations. So that initial fetch there. Now this is then going to return an array, square bracket closes that, and then parentheses closes that. Now this is going to return an array. So I will use array destructuring to generate that as response. And we'll change this to be, what's that, sessions response, just to make sure it's better indicated of what it's actually doing. Now we'll create a new fetch, fetch to /API/user selections. And we'll also pass in the abort controller, so that like if we abort one, we abort both. And then we will unpack that as selections response. And then that can be, let's rename that one as well. That can be sessions data. And then we will add selections data and then set selections. Alrighty, let's have a look at our debugger here. Reload that. Let's check our fetch. There we go. We'll see that it attempted to load those two initially, but they both got cancelled, and then we've just got back what we wanted. Fantastic. Now we're going to need a way, obviously, to modify those selections, but so I'm going to create a couple of little helper functions that will pass down to our child components. We'll create a new one called add selection, and that will take a session ID, and that can be a string, and then that will just call set selections. And then this time we're going to take the current data, and then we will do a array destructuring of that. So in this case, because the hooks could, because we could click on multiple buttons in quick succession, and the React concurrency engine might not have completed, we're going to just use the callback approach to setting state, so that it will then create a stack of state mutations to execute, rather than just potentially modifying this inside of a closure scope that has that is incorrect. We'll just always use the current. We'll do array destructuring. We'll add that to the array, and then we'll add that session to the end. Now we're going to add a remove selection, and we will just use an array filter. And again, we're going to use that off the current selections there. Just say filter, and we're going to find all in the current set that aren't matching the session ID. Easy. Let's now pass this one into our session component. We're going to pass through the 3 bits of props. So we'll pass through selections, add selection. Now this is going to have some red squiggles for the moment because we haven't added these props to our component, but we'll do that shortly. Remove selection, remove selection. And I just realized I spelled that incorrectly. Cool. Let's come into our session. Actually, because I'm going to pass this down a couple of times, we'll pass that in there. We'll add that to the session list. And then finally, we'll go to session list, which will pass it through to sessions themselves. So it's going to cascade down a few times, but we'll worry about that. We'll populate that out next. Okay, so we'll have selections, which is going to be a string array. We'll have the add selection, which is going to be a dispatch function. So dispatch is a type that is provided by React. So it's essentially a function that takes a value and returns a void, which is kind of what we defined there. So I'm just going to use that type rather than creating a complex type signature for this. We'll do remove selection, and that will also be a dispatch of string. Okay, let's add these to our child component as our definitions go ahead. We need to import that on our React import statement. Ta-da, there we go. And last thing is to actually grab selections, add selection, and remove selection. There we go. We'll grab these, add that to here, and we'll add that to here. Okay, everything is cascading down nicely. We need to add the button, obviously. First, we need to know, is this selected? So is the current session that we're rendering selected? So is the ID of this session in the array of selected sessions? And then we will say is selected. Oh, did I call it is select? Okay, I've called it is select. We'll create a button component from Fluent UI. And then let's add let's make the appearance. So if it is selected, we're going to make this a secondary button appearance. And then what's to say? Yep, the on click is going to be remove, and then we'll close the button out there. Ooh. Whoops. I tried to create nested buttons. There we go. And then we're going to say remove from watch list. Okay. Oops. Got to close my curly bracket, I think. Yep. And then I need to do the same again, which will be adds, and we'll say add to watch list / button, and then close bracket, close squiggle, and we'll see, did I get everything? Looks like it's even appeared. Everything looks great. It's not quite looking how I want. Let's grab in, I'm going to grab in a icon. Fluent UI supports icons, so I'm going to add a little icon onto this one here. There we go. I need to import that component though. There we go. We've added our icon. There we go. How does this look full screen? It's hard up against that. That's not what I want. Let's add some developer styling. So we're going to add style, and we are going to say float right. I'm a developer, and this is how I do CSS. Hey, look, it's still not looking great because it's such a tiny screen, but it looks better on the big screen there. Everything's floated to the right. Maybe put a bit of margin on the bottom of that so that it fits, so it sits down there. Dock that to the right correctly. Let's just say style margin. There we go. Actually, margin bottom. We'll say 10 px. Oh, actually, no, not margin. I want padding bottom. There we go. And did that work? Oh, maybe I do want margin bottom. Margin. Let's see. Is that working? Is that looking better in full screen? No. Pop to the right. Style, margin bottom. Did I put that on the right element? Yeah. Let me refer to my notes. Reckons padding bottom should have been needed. Padding bottom. Okay. Anyway, we can make it look prettier later on. That's the functionality. Like, let's make it functional first, and then we'll make it look pretty. Okay. yeah. Anyway, that's okay. So now that's done. We've got local state working. So as we click, we can do that. But if I reload the page, we'll lose that session being added to our thing because added to our watch list because, well, I haven't persisted that back to our backend. Lastly, we're going to add a use effect hook here. And this will follow kind of that same pattern as before. We'll do save selections. Excellent. But we're going to need to pass in the selections as a thing here. And then we're going to also have our abort controller. We're going to pass in our abort controller and we'll pass the signal. And then last but not least, we'll return the abort controller. Save that. Excellent. Okay, so let's have a look. Does this work? Yep. Okay, we'll add to watch list. That's looking good. We see we had a selection down here where we sent that up and we don't get any response back from that. So there's no that, but there we go. We've added that one to our watch list. Reload. And it's been removed from the watch list. So close, so close. Okay, let's have a look what's happened here. Added to our watch list. We can see that it's there. Now let's reload the page and we'll have a look. So it's gone. We are doing some call, like we're sending an empty array up. That's not right. Now, well, I mean, it's not what we want, but it's actually what we kind of expect. The reason that that's happening is because we're not telling it when to save selection. We're just, whenever the session array changes, we're going to send that up. So what's happening is that we create an empty array of selections. So we send that up, which then causes the mutation, which then we initially get back that selected list, but we then immediately override it. And we rewrite the data. So that's kind of problematic. Instead, what we want to do is if the session, so if we have loaded, then we want to do save selections, just to avoid this kind of race condition that we're hitting. But we're also going to have to add data load state into our use effect hook there. Now, this is not a perfect solution. I will be honest on that. There, like we can do some improvements in avoiding these race conditions, but from the scale of this kind of an application, this will work quite well. All right, so that reloaded, yep. Add to watch list. Day 2, we'll add to watch list. And now let's reload and fingers crossed, yes, we have received that correctly. That is on the watch list. This one's on the watch list, and this one here is not because we hadn't added that one there. Well, that's I think that's not bad for nearly an hour's worth of work. Now, there's obviously more you can do to this application, but we're just about coming to the end of what we've got time for today. An exercise that might be fun for you to continue on with this is inside of our sessionize list here, you could add a new tab. I'm going to say a tab, and then this one will say, not call it all, we'll say selected sessions, and then we'll say, or actually watch list. Call it, yeah, we'll call the value watch list. Should I have a capital L? No, without capital L. Okay. Anyway, but there you go. You could have like the watch list there, and you could have that selected, and then it will only show the sessions that are in your watch list. Now, for doing that, you would have to work out, well, how are you pulling that, working with that JavaScript data and loading up what will essentially be a virtual day, because that day doesn't exist in our current data set. But like I said, could be something. It could be something fun to experiment with in your own time. Like I said, we are coming towards the end of today's session, and just as we wrap up, let me bring up our resources slides and come to the right screen. Thank you for joining me for today's Student Zone session around building with ASP.NET Minimal API and single-page applications. Obviously, in this case, we use React. You can translate that across to any other front-end UI framework. If you want to check out some of the other sessions we've got on the Student Zone this year, you'll find all their resources at aka.ms/netconf23/student repo. You'll find their source code and links to their recordings in there. And we also have some other links here that could be some additional learnings if you want to follow on those, such as some C# certification that we released a couple of months ago, some beginner videos around .NET, and obviously check out all the sessions that are happening at .NET Conf this year. You'll find those at aka.ms/.netconf23/student zone. You'll find other student zone sessions plus the rest of the conference that's happening. My name's Aaron Powell. Thank you for joining me for today. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you next time.